Hello there. Can you hear me now? Hello? Oh, thank goodness. Yeah, I forgot I was spending some time in the end of eternity room. And it's very hard to hear yourself in a vacuum, isn't it? I better start my little introduction once again. Hello, 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 greetings, salutations, konnichiwa, and every other form of greeting across this vast, marvelous multiverse. I am Matsu Quinox. This is Horace. Oh, there you are, Horace. Why did you come with me into the room? Oh, you were waiting for here. All right. Oh, well, I'm sorry. I had to have some alone time. And welcome back, my dear scholars, to the study. I hope you're all doing well. Hello there, Julian20. Welcome. Hello there, Private Maverick. Welcome. And hello there, Dr. Zadium. Welcome as well. I hope everyone has been doing well. Let me just open up this water. How is everyone doing? Julian20. Oh, yes, much better. Oh, I'm glad to hear it. Dr. Zadium. Yep. Oh, I'm glad to hear you're doing well. Oh, I will admit, I've been a little bit on edge. There's um there's something about there's something about what's going on in the study. I'm not sure. The um the book squids seem a little agitated more than usual. I have a real bad feeling about that, but I'm hoping nothing comes out of it. Oh, one second, my dear scholars. I will be right back. Or not. Oh, that was odd. Thought I heard something. Cool skeleton. Hello. Well, hello to you as well, my dear cool skeleton. I hope you're doing well, my fine bony friend. Well, tonight is actually an extra special reading night. I am looking forward to this. I've been actually looking forward to this for a little bit now. Tonight we are going to be reading science fiction stories. Oh, I love science fiction. I love the genre so much. And these stories, cool skeleton, indeed I am. I've been working on a few projects. Oh, good. I love hearing about your projects. Julian 20, I love science fiction. Cool skeleton, looks like I just made. Yes, you did. You made it just in time. And I mustn't forget, we have to say thank you for the new follow, Ayo0720. I hope I put that right. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and welcome, new scholar, to our little group. Excuse me. I better make some introductions. I am Matsu Quinox, interdimensional omniversal librarian. This is Horace, my fine friend. And this is the study where we both play games and read books for your entertainment. And like I said, tonight we are going to be reading some science fiction stories. Now, these stories I picked as ones that I personally find fairly interesting. And here's a little fun. Here's one fun thing about them. Then you might find most of these stories, expiring one, are from the 50s. Now you might ask yourself, Matsu, the 1950s. That's not in the public domain, so how are you able to read it? Well, it's a bit of a quirk in copyright. I believe around the 50s, the the thing with copyrighted material back then is you actually had to renew the copyright. It wasn't an automatic turnover. I don't know when that happened. It was either the 60s or 70s that became a thing. Which means that a lot of these stories, authors apparently did not renew the copyright on the material, which means they are currently in the public domain, as far as I know. Cool skeleton into the Matsu zone. Maybe we should call that for the study next time. The Matsu zone. I kind of like it actually. But anyway, so tonight we'll be able to hear some more some later material than we usually read. So, my dear, fine, wonderful, perfect scholars, are you ready to hear some tales of tomorrow? Some stories of what may have been or might be in the years to come? Cool skeleton, beep boop. Private Maverick, let's hear them. Oh, someone's a little bit impatient. Julian 20. Oh, yes, indeed. Oh, good, good. Let me get a drink of water. Cool skeleton, robotic skeleton noises. Ironically enough, none of these stories actually have robots in them. I don't think, at least. We'll find out. Alright. So sit back, my dear scholars, relax, have a hot or cold beverage of whatever is your liking, and we will begin our readings of some science fiction tales. Let me part the curtains. Ah. Alright then. So our first story for tonight is a story by Jack McKenty, originally published in 1954, and it is entitled $1,000 a Plate. Julian 20. Ooh, I love this one. Oh, you know this one? Interesting. Sunset on Mars is a pale, washed out, watery sort of procedure that is hardly worth looking at. The shadows of the cactus lengthen, the sun goes down without the slightest hint of color or display, and everything is dark. About once a year there is one cloud that turns pink briefly, but even the travel books devote more space describing the new sign adorning the Canal Casino than they do on the sunset. The night sky is something else again. Each new crop of tourists go to bed at sunrise the day after arrival with stiff necks from looking up all night. The craters of the moons are visible to the naked eye, and even a cheap pair of opera glasses can pick out the buildings of the demo space station. A typical comment from a sightseer is, "Just think, Fred, we were way up there only 12 hours ago." At fairly frequent intervals, the moon's eclipse. The local Chamber of Commerce joins with the gambling casinos to use these occasions as excuses for a celebration. The Marzi Gras includes floats, costumes, liquor, women, gambling, and finishes off with a display of fireworks and a stiff note of protest from the nearby Mars Observatory. Oh, hello there, Ritsuka. Welcome. Good to see you. We've just started reading our first science fiction story for the night, $1,000 a plate. The day after a particularly noisy, glaring fireworks display, the top brass at the observatory called an emergency meeting. The topic was not a new one, but fresh evidence in the form of several still wet photographic plates showing out of focus skyrocket trails and a galaxy of first magnitude aerial cracker explosions was presented. "I maintain they fire them in our direction on purpose," one scientist declared. This was considered to be correct, because the other directions around town were oil refineries and the homes of the casino owners. "Why don't we just move the observatory way out in the desert?" a technician demanded. "It wouldn't be much of a job." "It would be a tremendous job," said Dr. Morton, the physicist. "If not for the glare of the city lights on Earth, we wouldn't have had to move our telescopes to the moon. If not for the gravel falling out of the sky on the moon, making it necessary to resurface the reflectors every week, we wouldn't have had to move to Mars. Viewing conditions here are just about perfect, except for the immense cost of transporting the equipment, building materials, workmen, and paying us triple time for working so far from home." Why did you ever figure the cost of a single photographic plate? That, sorry, I misread that. Why did you ever figure the cost of a single photographic plate? What with salaries, freight to and from Earth, maintenance, and all the rest, it's enormous! Then why don't we cut down the cost of ruined exposures? Asked the technician. By moving the observatory away from town. Because, Dr. Morton explained, we'd have to bring in crews to tear the place down, other crews to move it, still more crews to rebuild it, not to mention unavoidable breakage and replacement, which involve more freight from Earth. At $7.97 per pound deadweight, well, you figure it out. I'm guessing that was a lot of money back then in the 50s. It is interesting. They are use. This is the future, and yet they're still using photographic plates. Kind of interesting there. So we can't. So we can't move, and we can't afford ruined $1,000 plates, said the scientist who had considered himself a target for the fireworks. Then what's the answer? The usual suggestion was proposed that a delegation approach the town council to follow up the letter of protest. A search through the past meeting's minutes showed that this had never accomplished anything up to date. A recent arrival to the observatory mentioned that their combined brainpower should be enough to beat the games, and thus force the casino owners, who were the real offenders, out of business. One of the scientists, who had already tried that very scheme on a small scale, reported his results. He proved, with his tabulations, that, in this instance, science, in the guise of the law of averages, was unfortunately against them. Dr. Morton rose to his feet. The other men listened to his plan, at first with shock horror, then with deep interest, and finally in wild exultation. The meeting broke up with most of the members grinning from ear to ear. It's lucky Dr. Morton is a physicist, said one of the directors. No astronomer would ever have thought of that. A few days later, a modest little ad appeared in the weekly publication, What to Do in Marsport. It did not try to compete with any of the casino ads, all of which featured pretty girls, but it had a unique heading. Free, for the first time ever, your horoscope, scientifically cast by the staff of the famous Mars Observatory. Learn your luck, your future. Write or call Mars Observatory. No charge, no obligation. Since the horoscopes being offered were about the only things on Mars that didn't cost the tourists any money, the response was great. The recipient of a horoscope found a mimeographed folder which contained 3 pages describing the present positions of the planets, where to look for Earth in the sky, and what science hoped to learn the next time Mercury was in transit. The 4th page held the kicker. It said that while the tourist's luck would be better than average at most of the gambling houses, he would lose consistently if he played at Harvey's Club. Within 2 days, the only people playing at Harvey's were the shills. The following day, the visitors to the observatory included Harvey. The gambler was welcomed with mingled respect for his money and contempt for his occupation. He was taken immediately to see Dr. Morton, who greeted him with a sly smile. Harvey's conversation was brief and to the point. "How much?" he asked, waving a horoscope under Dr. Morton's nose. "Just a promise," said the scientist. Harvey said nothing but looked sullen. You are on the town council, Morton continued. Now, the next time the question of tourist entertainment is discussed, we want you to vote against a fireworks display. He then explained how important plates had been ruined by skyrocket trails. Harvey listened with great interest, especially when Dr. Morton flatly stated that each casino in turn would get the same publicity in the horoscopes. The council members are all for the tourists, Harvey commented. And you guys are supposed to be nuts, like all scientists. But I'll do like you say. He reached into his pocket. Here's $50. Use it for a full page ad this time. And do the Desert Sands Casino in your next horoscope. And say, before I go, can I look through the telescope? I never seem to have the time before. At weekly intervals, Dr. Morton did the Desert Sands, Franklin's Paradise, the Martian Gardens, and the Two Moons Club. From each owner, he extracted the same promise: to vote against the fireworks at the council meetings. I have to say, these scientists are pretty clever. The technique was settling down to a routine. Each victim came, made the promise, paid for the following week's ad, named the next casino, and was taken on a tour of the observatory. Then, disaster struck. It took the form of an interplanetary telegram from Harvard Observatory, their parent organization. It read, Earth newspapers carrying accounts of horoscopes published by your organization. Very unscientific. Must stop at once. Find other solution. L.K. Bell, Director. Dr. Morton was eating alone in the staff dining room when he noticed a familiar face beside him. Harvey, he said, guess you've come down to gloat over our misfortune. No, Professor, said Harvey. You've got my promise to help you boys, and I'll stick by you. It's a rotten shame, too. You just about made it. The rest of the club owners saw the writing on the wall and were going to cooperate with you when the telegram came. All of us got contacts in the telegraph office, so they heard about it as soon as it arrived and stayed away. Dr. Morton said, Yes, I suppose they would. There's not much we can do now. There are 13 members on the council, Harvey continued, and you've got 5 of us. If that telegram had only come one day later, no more fireworks. But I got an idea. Dr. Morton pushed aside his empty coffee cup and stood up. Let's get out in the fresh air. The town council was adding insult to injury by staging one of the biggest fireworks displays ever. It consisted of practically all skyrockets. Dr. Morton expressed wonder at their supply. Harvey explained that they were made right on Mars. He went on to tell his idea. I was real interested in everything when you took me around the first time I was here, the gambler said. The same goes for the other boys who saw the place. Most of us meant to come out here and look around sometime, but you people work nights, and us mostly working nights too. We never got around to it. How about arranging an exclusive tour sometime, just for the club operators and their help? Then, when they see everything, you could offer to name a star after them or something. If I hadn't already promised, I'd be willing to promise, just to be able to point in the sky and say, That's Harvey's star. Dr. Morton smiled gently. That's a wonderful idea, he said, but I don't think it would work. Any stars worth looking at with the naked eye already have names. The only ones we could name after people are so far away that it would take an exposure of several hours just to see them on a photographic plate. You wouldn't be able to point yours out at all. Besides, Harvard Observatory wouldn't stand for this idea either. It would make as much sense to them as you naming a poker chip after me. He sighed. But in any case, we would like to have all the owners over sometime. It might improve relations somewhat. The two of them watched the rocket wobble all over the sky before exploding. Let's go back inside, said the physicist. Maybe we can arrange that tour for Sunday. Another little drink of water. Again, it's quite interesting. You know, this is supposed to be set in the future, and yet the technology very much is in the 50s, which is not uncommon with science fiction. We tend to postulate about a future. Well, I should say, authors tend to postulate about a future, but they will often ground it in what they know, even when they try to guess what future technology might be like. Sunday afternoon, the visitors, presumably softened up by what one of the chemists thought were martinis, were seated in the lecture hall listening to Dr. Morton's concluding remarks. One of the technicians is working on a gadget with a photocell that closes the shutter on the film when a rocket goes up, Dr. Morton was saying. It would cut down the exposure time a great deal. Right now, every night may be significant. If the plates from any one night are spoiled, we may not be able to duplicate them for a Martian year. Mankind is preparing the first trip to another star, and the work of Mars Observatory is necessary to ensure the success of that trip. You gentlemen are rightly the leaders of Mars, and so it is up to you to decide whether or not that success will be possible. He sat down to a smattering of applause. The visitors, except Harvey, then left. It didn't go over, Professor, said Harvey. I know, said Dr. Morton. That washes out that plan. He turned to the gambler. You're the only person I can trust with this, he said. How would you like to help me make some fireworks? Interesting little turn there. One week later, the two men had everything ready. That night, as quietly as possible, they moved to position behind a fence near the skyrocket launching racks. Dr. Morton was carrying a compass, a flashlight, and a small clinometer. Harvey was struggling with two large skyrockets. He whispered, What if we miss, or they go off too soon, or something? Nonsense, Harvey, said Dr. Morton. He busied himself with the flashlight and compass, and carefully aimed one of the rockets. You forget I am a physicist. He then aimed the other rocket and checked elevation with the clinometer. The fuels are standard, and I worked out the trajectories on the computer. Ready with your match? These are going to explode in the canal and get everybody in the canal casino all wet. He peeked over the fence to see how the regular display was doing. Here comes the finale. Ready? Set. Light! Covered by the launching of the last of the official display, their two rockets arced up and away. One of them did explode in the canal, and most of the casino's patrons did get wet. But the other wobbled off to the right, landed on the roof of Harvey's bachelor home, and burned it to the ground. All the things that could happen. Oh dear, dear. They have the worst luck, it seems. Dr. Morton sat numbly in front of his typewriter, staring at a letter. He couldn't seem to find the right words for what he wished to say. He tried to derive inspiration from a glossy photograph lying on the table beside him. It had what looked like another skyrocket trail on it. Before he could answer it, the door opened, and Harvey walked in, accompanied by two men with muscles. "I haven't seen you since the accident, Professor," he said. "I've been trying to write you a letter," said Dr. Morton, "to tell you how sorry I am about what happened. And I also have to thank you for getting that law against fireworks through the council. I'm extremely sorry it took your house burning down to convince them." "I keep my promises," said Harvey. One of the men with muscles turned the radio on, loud. "We're trying to get a collection among the staff to help pay for your losses," said Dr. Morton, "but the director suggested a more permanent kind of remembrance." He picked up the photograph. "This will be one of the brightest objects in the sky in a few months. It won't be back again for thousands of years, but it will be around for a good while. We've just discovered it, and it is our privilege to call it Harvey's Comet." "Aw, I remember made that promise." "That's nice," said Harvey. The first of the two men went around pulling down blinds. The other went into the bathroom and started filling the tub. "Well," said the physicist, looking tired and cold, "I guess there's nothing more I can say." "Oh, yes, there is, Professor," said Harvey with a sudden grin on his face. He turned to his muscle men. "You two guys cut out the comedy and bring it in, now." "You see, Professor?" No, I skipped a line, sorry. The two men followed his instructions. "You see, Professor?" the gambler continued. "I took a beating on the house, but the other club boys chipped in and made up all my losses. So I don't need your money at all. Besides, I have two things to thank you for. First, I heard about the comet from one of your men, and it's the nicest thing anybody's ever done for me." One of his men came back with what looked like a round candy bar box. "Second, that fire was the best publicity stunt I could get. It made the papers back on Earth, and all the new tourists are packing into the Harvey Club. Even the other operators are playing my tables. That's why I want you to have this." He handed Dr. Morton the box. It read Harvey's Club in the center, and Dr. Morton's poker chip around the edge. Across the bottom it said 5,000. "That's dollars in it, Professor," said Harvey. "Don't spend it all in one place." The end. I rather like that story. I think it's witty. It's a witty science fiction story. I mean, it's kind of interesting that they portray Mars as essentially space Las Vegas, which is not, you know, is an interesting take on Mars in the future. Julian 20, great story. Oh, I love it. It's one of my favorites. And yeah, it's an interesting take on Mars. The idea that Mars at that time of the future is essentially run by gangsters and is their version of Las Vegas. I I will admit some of the lights a little bit Marsy Gras. FT Waste. Oh, what we got in the sci-fi genre today. This is my kind of read. Oh, good. We just finished our first story for the evening, which is $1,000 a plate by Jack McKenty, which involved a Mars in the future, which is essentially space Las Vegas, and a conflict with an observatory over photographic plates. It was pretty funny, pretty funny. For those who are just coming in, these stories I'm reading tonight are actually all from the 1950s, barring one. One of them is from the 40s. But because the copyright of them has lapsed and was never renewed, I am able to read them tonight. Firefly, what happens in Mars stays on Mars. Yes. Also, hello, Firefly. Welcome. Good to see you. Feels like it's been a while, but I'm glad to have you here. The next story is a tad shorter, and it's another interesting little tale. This story is called "End as a World." "End as a World" by F. L. Wallace. Originally published in 1955. Excuse me. Every paper said so in all the languages there were, I guess. I kept reading them, but didn't know what to believe. I know what I wanted to think, but that's different from actually knowing. There was the usual news just after Labor Day. The Dodgers were winning or losing. I forget which. And the UCLA was strong and was going to beat everybody they met that fall. An H-bomb had been tested in the Pacific, blowing another island off the map, just as if we had islands to spare. Ordinarily, this was important. But now it wasn't. They put stuff like this in the back pages and hardly anybody reads it. There was only one thing on the front pages, and it was all people talked about. All I talked about, anyway. It began long before. I don't know how long because they didn't print that. But it began, and there it was, right upon us that day. It was Saturday. Big things always seem to happen on Saturdays. I ate breakfast and got out early. I had the usual things to do, mowing the lawn, for instance. I didn't do it, nor anything else, and nobody said anything. There wasn't any use in mowing the lawn on a day like that. I went out, remembering not to slam the door. It wasn't much, but it showed thoughtfulness. I went past the church and looked at the sign that was set diagonally at the corner so that it could be read from both streets. There it was in big letters, quoting from the papers. "This is the day the world ends." Some smart reporter had thought it up, and it seemed so true that that was the only way it was ever said. Me? I don't know. Ooh, bit of a dramatic story here. It was a bright day. People were out walking or just standing and looking at the sky. It was too early to look up. I went on. Paul Eberhard was sitting on the lawn when I came along. He tossed me the football and I caught it and tried to spin it on my finger. It didn't spin. It fell and flopped out with crazy bounces into the street. The milk truck stopped while I got it out of the way. I tossed the football back to Paul. He put his hand on it and sat there. "What do we do?" he said. I made a motion with my hands. "We can throw the ball around," I said. "Nah," he said. "Maybe you got some comic books." "You've seen them all," I said. "You got some?" "I gave them to Howie," he said, thoughtfully screwing the point of the ball into the center of a dandelion. "He said he was going to get some new ones, though. Let's go see." He got up and tossed the ball towards the porch. It hit the railing and bounced back into the bushes. That's where he usually kept it. "Paul!" called his mother as we started out. "Yeah?" "Don't go far. I've got some things I want you to do." "What?" "Hauling trash out of the basement, helping me move some of the potted plants around in the front." "Sure," he said. "I'll be back." "Cool, Skeleton. You do a pretty good Chad voice." I'll take that as a compliment. I'm not doing it on purpose, but apparently it's coming out that way. We went past another church on the way to Howie's. The sign was the same there. "This is the day the world ends." They never said more than that. They wanted to hang in our minds. Something we couldn't quite touch, but we knew was there. Cool, Skeleton. "Yeah, man, like, totally." Paul jerked his head at the sign. "What do you think of it?" "I don't know." I broke off a twig as we passed a tree. "What about you?" "We got it coming." He looked at the sky. "Yeah, but will we get it?" He didn't answer that. "I wonder if it'll be bright." "It is now." "It might cloud over." "It won't matter. It'll split the sky." That was one thing sure. Clouds or anything weren't going to stand in the way. We went on and found Howie. Howie is smaller than we are and twice as fast. I will say I had to skip a word which has aged horribly in this story, so I'm not going to talk about that. 1950s, I'll put it that way. Howie is smaller than we are and twice as fast. He can throw a football farther and straighter than anyone else on the team. We pal around quite a bit, especially in the football season. He came out of the house like he was walking on whipped cream. I didn't let that fool me. More than once I've tried to tackle him during a practice game. Howie was carrying a model of a rocket ship, CO2 powered. It didn't work. We said hi all around, and then he suggested a game of keep away. We'd left the football at Paul's, and we couldn't, so we walked over to the park. We sat down and began talking about it. "I'm wondering if it will really come," said Paul. We all squinted up. "Where'll the president watch it from?" I said. "He should have a good view from the White House." "No better than us right here," said Howie. "What about Australia? Will they see it there?" I said. "They'll see it over. They'll see it all over." "Africa too?" "And what about the Arctic?" "It doesn't matter whether they actually see it or not. It'll come to everyone at the same time." I didn't see how it could. But I didn't feel like an argument. That's what they were saying on TV, and you can't talk back to that. Get a drink of water. "Everybody," said Howie, "not just in this town, but all over. Wherever there are people, even where they're not. You read that? Said Paul. Sure, said Howie. You lent me the comic books. It's even in them. We didn't say much after that. I kept thinking of the man who made the H bomb. I bet he felt silly and spiteful, blowing up an island. Somebody might have wanted to live on it, if he just left it there. He must have felt mean and low when something really big like this came along. We talked on for a while, but we'd talked it out long ago. There was really nothing new we could say. Every so often, we'd look up at the sky, but it wasn't going to come until it got here. Finally, we drifted apart. There wasn't anything left to do. We walked home with Howie, and then I went with Paul, leaving him to come back to my house. Excuse me. I looked at the lawn, and without thinking about it, got busy and mowed it. I surprised myself. It was hot, or it seemed to me it was. I went in to eat. Ma came by and shut off the sound of the TV. I could still see the picture in the other room. The announcer was making faces, but of course I didn't hear what he said. He looked pretty funny, I thought. I thought we were all probably pretty funny, moving our mouths and blinking our eyes and waving our hands. Only nothing real was coming out. Not yet, anyway. Sit still, said Ma. It will happen without your help. It's going to be all right. Think so? I said. She would have told me anything to keep me quiet. She gets nervous when I fidget. I think so, she said, giving me my allowance. It was early for that. Usually I didn't get it until after supper. Why don't you run uptown and watch it from there? Maybe I will, I said, dabbling my hands in the water at the sink. Are you going to go? Of course I'm not. Why should I get into that mob? I can watch it just as well from here. Sure she could, but it was not the same. Everybody I knew was going to be there. I changed shirts before I left. I took a rag and wiped the dust from my shoes. I wasn't trying to be fussy or dressed up or anything. I just thought I should do it. There was shade and sun on the streets, and a few big clouds in the sky. Oh my goodness, I wonder what's going to happen. A car slowed down and stopped beside me. The window rolled down, and Jack Goodwin leaned toward me. Going uptown? Yeah. Want a lift? Sure. Actually, I didn't. I'd rather have walked, looking around as I went. Jack Goodwin grinned as I got in. Weird. He's got gray hair where he has hair. The rest is bald. He looked me over. I don't see any comets on your shoulders, he said gravely. I never had any, I said. Some people seem to think everyone under 17 is a kid. You'll be needing them, he said. Maybe. I never knew how slow a day could pass. I suppose I should have slept late and kept busy doing something. This was worse than putting on a uniform and waiting until game time. At least there was a coach on the field to tell you what to do as you ran through the drill. Jack Goodwin stopped at a light. I had a notion to get out, but I didn't. Goodwin grinned again as the light changed, and we started up. I don't blame you for being edgy, he said. It's the suspense. If we only had some way of knowing for sure. Radio, maybe. There's no radio, I said. The calculations have been checked. Sure, but maybe there's something we forgot, or I don't know. All sorts of things can go wrong. He must have talked on, but I didn't listen. Howie and me and Paul had gone over everything he was saying. Thanks, I said as he stopped and I got out. Don't mention it, he said. He nearly scraped the rear fender of the car as he drove off. It was a new car, too. He wasn't so bad. Maybe he was just worried. Well, if it was the end of the world, I'd be worried too. I wandered to the newsstand and looked at the magazines and pocketbooks. Old Lady Simpson didn't ask me if I was going to buy, and didn't chase me away. She was busy arguing with some customers. Even so, it was the first time she didn't pay attention to me when I came in. I had a good chance to look at things I never buy. There was nothing in them I wanted to see. I was thirsty. I had a Coke and was still thirsty. I asked for a glass of water, drank half of it, and went out. Another little drink. Ow. Ah. My goodness. Just splashed myself in the face with water. Oh. Down the street, there was a TV set in a store window. I watched it. They were showing a street in India. People looking up. They flashed all around to Italy, China, Brazil. Except for their clothes, it wasn't much different from here. They were all looking up. Excuse me. I did the same. For the first time, I noticed there was a slight overcast. Big billowing clouds had passed, but this was worse. I hoped it would clear away in time. Not that it really mattered. It was more crowded than usual for Saturday, but at the same time it was quiet. People were shopping, but they weren't really buying much, or else they bought it faster. Nobody wanted to miss it. They all seemed to have one eye on their lists and another on the clock. Howie and Paul came up the street and we nodded and said something. A few other boys from the school passed by and we stopped. We gathered together. It was getting closer, and the space between the minutes was growing longer and longer. I looked at Paul's watch. He said it was on the minute. I decided there was time to go in and get a candy bar. All of a sudden I was hungry. I didn't know where it came from. I'd had to stuff down lunch not long ago, and now I was hungry. I went to a store and had to fight my way in. People were coming out. Not just customers, but the clerks and owner too. There was a big television screen inside, but nobody wanted to see it on that. They wanted to be outside, where it would happen to them. Not just see it, have it happen. Not just see it, have it happen. The store was empty. Not closed. Empty. I turned and rushed out to join the others. I couldn't miss it. There were still minutes to go, but I suppose there had been a miscalculation. I knew what that would mean, but even so, I had to be there. I would almost die too. Now we were all looking up. All over the world people were, I suppose. It was quiet. You could hear them breathing. And then it came. A flash across the sky. A silver streak. The biggest vapor trail there ever was. It went from this side to that side in no time. It split the sky and was gone before the shock blast hit us. Nobody said anything. We stood there and shivered and straightened up after the rumbling sound passed. But there was the vapor trail that stretched farther than anyone could see. It would go around the world at least once before it came to an end somewhere in the desert. I saw my science teacher. He was trying to smile but couldn't. And then there was the pharmacist who had wanted to be a research chemist but wasn't good enough. In front of me, old Fred Butler, who drives the bus to Orange Point in King City, cracked his knuckles. "He did it," he whispered. "All the way to Mars and back. Safe and right on schedule." He jumped up in the air and kept jumping up. He hadn't been that high off the ground in several years. He never would be again unless he took an elevator. And I knew he hated elevators. Factory whistles started blowing. They sounded louder than Gabriel. I wonder if he heard them. I grabbed hold of the nearest person and started hugging. I didn't know it was the snooty girl from the next block until she hugged back and began kissing me. We yelled louder than the factory whistles. We had a right. It was just like the papers said. This was the day the world ended. And the universe began. The end. Oh my goodness, I had shivers reading that one. Oh, that is one of my favorites. I love the build. I love the slow build up. Oh, I have a huge grin on my face. That story is one of my favorite ones to read. Oh my goodness. Oh, I hope you scholars enjoyed that one. Oh, that one gets the heart beating. Oh, excuse me. Cool skeleton, spoopy. Yeah, it is a bit spoopy. I mean, it builds you up to thinking, what's the end of the world happening? Why is everyone looking up in the sky? And the way they write it, it has all that suggestions, and then you find out at the end what it means. And it's just this amazing thing. Oh, it's a fantastic story. It's one of my favorites. So the next story is a bit of a longer one again. And this one was originally published in October of 1955. And it is by Stephen Tall and is entitled The Light on Precipice Peak. Oh, for all you viewers who have come in, let me reintroduce myself. I am Matsu Quinox, interdimensional omniversal librarian, and I am here to read some science fiction stories to you on this fine evening, or morning, or afternoon, or wherever you are, my dear scholars. And I hope you're enjoying your time here. Once again, this is The Light on Precipice Peak. Kintron, and to enjoy author's puns. Oh, Kintron! Hello there, Kintron. Welcome. We are just starting our third science fiction story for the evening. Yes, I am a target of puns constantly. The three young men sat quietly and watched the faint, eerie glow. It was ruddy and small, a spot of dull red color. For perhaps 5 or 6 minutes it showed, moving slowly along what seemed to be the tip of Bighorn Glacier, 6 miles away, and 7,000 feet up in the thin, cold air. Then it vanished. Julian 20, gotta love that Kintron. Yes, we all love Kintron. He's wonderful. John John Drinkard lowered his binoculars. Well, that's that. You can see it, but still you can't. The glasses don't help a bit. Spooks, said Chuck Evers. He wriggled his muscular shoulders, slipping down onto the small of his back in the chair, and propped long legs on the porch railing. Spooks? Carl Roston's brow wrinkled puzzledly. Drinkard and Evers both watched with suppressed amusement as his face suddenly cleared and he almost smiled. Ah, yes, apparitions. Aunts, Chuck said. Hobgoblins, ghosts, banshees. Banshees, whales, said Drinkard. Ralston's pale eyes glowed with interest. This you can say for the lights of Precipice Peak. They are quiet. Are you sure? John Drinkard asked. How do you know that every coyote you hear is a coyote? At any rate, said Royston, if they make sounds, they are the sounds of the country. He shivered slightly. A miserable country, he added. John Drinkard was thick and blocky, with big hands and a square chin. Chuck Evers was long and sinewy. Beside them, Royston seemed a pale, slight figure, his thin face sallow, his shoulders ever hunched against the crisp western air. You are speaking of the land I love, said Chuck Evers. If you don't like it, why stay around? Ralston shrugged. It is supposed to make me a man of vigor, with red corpuscles and a need for cold shower baths. Actually, there's nothing wrong with me. I was simply born to sit and watch with great louts like you run and wrestle and climb and sweat. He shifted his gaze to the peak, now a dark silhouette against the ice-clear stars. There, the light shows again. Slowly, the red globe progressed along a cliff face, much higher than it had before. For minutes it moved along steadily, then faded. That thing, said Evers suddenly, was going along Fifth Avenue. Spooks don't need a route of ascent, even up Precipice. All of a sudden, the lights of Precipice Peak are getting solid. I got a feeling that they'll leave a sign. They'll leave sign. Sign? Royston's voice went up in the darkness. There was a familiar pause. Then Royston's satisfied tone. Ah, yes, traces. Right, traces, tracks, spoor. Only mystery about those lights is we don't know who makes them. But they're getting to be a tourist attraction. Maybe that's a lead. How many trips have there been up precipice this season? Ralston queried softly. 15 or so, John Drinkard said. And the boy has something, any sign of, and he have there, not the boy. What was it? And he has something. Any sign on Fifth Avenue or across Bighorn would have been seen by now. They've been some good mountain men on the peak this summer. Some of 'em don't miss much. Ralston hugged his narrow shoulders and made himself small in his chair, shivering again as the chill mountain breeze blew across the porch of the lodge. Over the swamps of my native Louisiana, where I wish I now was, I've seen balls of fire go drifting. It is swamp gas, methane, slowly oxidizing and glowing. Could this could this on the mountain be something like? It's almost impossible, said Evers. And anyhow, he added stubbornly, balls of gases wouldn't follow a trail. Those blasted lights do. John Drinkard rose easily, stretched his thick arms wide. Tomorrow, Chuck, tomorrow, he reminded. Take it easy. Tomorrow you can look for yourself, remember? At daybreak we go up to solve the mystery of the lights. Ghastly, said Ralston. To go out at dawn is as bad as eating raw flesh. But tap on my cabin door when you go by. I will wave to you from the window. John Dricard swung his nailed short boots along the trail with a steady, satisfying rhythm. Ahead of him, Chuck Evers set the pace, an easy, loose-jointed shamble that ate up the mountain miles. They were a good team. They felt the trail alike. Drinkard swelled his big chest, then exhaled gustily, as though to expel the last of the tainted air of the settlements below. He warmed slowly to a climb approach, and he would have liked a breather. Ahead the trail switched back sharply. At the switchback, Evers broke his stride, swung the pack sack from his shoulders, and leaned his long frame against a boulder. Break, he said. I heard you heave like a floundered mule. John Drinkard grinned. He shrugged off his own pack. It'll be good to enjoy the view, and not have to look at your silly hat. Chuck tilted the Swiss mountaineer's hat, complete with eagle feather. These are the Alps of America, he observed, so my hat is fitting. It doesn't even fit you, said Drinkard. Forests of lodgepole pine and spruce lay below them. Already the resort town seemed a toy settlement at the edge of the valley, and the sagebrush world stretched away east to the horizon. To the north, the big peaks of the range tumbled in a massive, orderly row, with lakes flashing along their bases, and a vast timbered plateau rearing up beyond. It was west, good American west, 20th century and solid, with clean cold mountain air, yellow sunlight on the cliffs, and snow fields above. As if by signal, both men turned their gazes upwards. The cutback was a vantage point from which could be seen the jumble of ridges and crags, surmounted by the glistening white expanse of Bighorn Glacier, and higher still, the seamed front of the eastern face of the mountain, tapering upward to the pinnacle of the peak. A lot of descriptives in this one. The men swung up their pack sacks and shook hands. Good luck, friend, said John Drinkard. Let's go and see if our names are still in the register up there. Good luck, said Evers. Tonight we'll be up where the lights are. Punch me if you see one first. Lights nuts, John Drinkard said. There'll be none while we're on the peak. $5 says so. Evers raised his eyebrows. I'm not a rich man, but I love a sporting chance. Here's my five. Where would we put 'em? Again, it's interesting to note 50s and how much $5 is apparently quite a bit of money back then. Drinkard fumbled in his jacket pocket, brought out a tobacco tin. He poured out the remaining tobacco into a pouch and held out the tin. Stick it in there, he said. Here's mine. A few paces off the trail, John Drinkard pried up a stone, slipped the tin underneath. Lights yours, no lights mine. Right? Right, said Evers, and he grinned at the little added spice for the 2 days ahead. Need to get another drink of water. This might be a little bit of a longer stream tonight. We'll see, my dear scholars. I hope you do not mind. Their steady, plodding passage up the ever-dimming trail was an appreciative one. Going into the world above the trees was one of the good things of a peak climb. Hoary marmots whistled from their rocks, conies scurried, brown and gray-barred. Ptarmigan, I think that's the pronunciation for this, ptarmigan crouched almost invisibly among the gaudy alpine fields of avens and mountain sunflowers and tiny forget-me-nots. At near dusk, they laid out their bedrolls on a level bit of tundra in the lee of a massive outcrop near Bighorn Glacier. A small fire of dead branches of firs and pines that literally crawled on their bellies at this altitude cooked a kettle of stew and heated the water for tea. Excuse me. Excuse me again. The men went through the simple chores of an evening camp with the ease that comes when things have been done many times. And when Chuck Evers walked a few paces from the fire, stepped on a small stone that rolled with his weight, he felt with a sort of irritating surprise the little thread of pain that ran through his ankle. Tentatively, he tested the foot, then hobbled back to the fire. He knew that he wouldn't climb the peak in the morning. He said nothing to Big John until he had stripped off the boot and heavy sock. Then, as Drinkard came back to the fire with more wood, he held out the ballooning ankle. "How are you at taping, friend?" he asked casually. Drinkard looked at the foot, already purpling as it swelled. He reached for his first aid kit. "Well, anyway," he said resignedly, "you got close enough to watch for lights." Evers set his teeth as Drinkard's big fingers probed the sprain. "We'll back ice on it," Drinkard decided, "then tape it in an hour. Maybe it's a simple twist." "You know it isn't." "Sure," admitted Drinkard. "You thought you wanted to be cheerful, that's all. It's like when I broke three ribs climbing to look into a bird's nest the day before we were tackling the east face of lawns. Then you were chin up." "That was different," said Evers. "I wasn't hurting." When the stars went out and the quarter moon rose from the plains, John Drinkard got up from his bedroll seat by the fire. The two men had sat talking quietly for an hour. Evers' ankle was taped, and he was easing it before him as best he could. "I'm going to have a look before I turned in," said Drinkard. "My five still says there won't be lights, but the technical crew may be monkeying around somewhere." "Take it easy," Chuck Evers said. I'll just skirt around the edge of the glacier. Back in half an hour. You take it easy. Drinkard knew Bighorn Glacier. Its crevices were so consistent that they were shown on maps. He carried his ice axe, but had no mind to use it. Only after he had worked his way for a number of minutes along the edge of the moonlit ice sheet did the whim to cross it seize him. The glacier had a good snow covering. The going was easy, and the view was something few men see. Drinkard automatically avoided the big ice cracks, then slipped through a snow roof into a shallow temporary one. He wasn't hurt. The moonlight from the crack above showed his ice axe beside him. It was a lucky fall, except for the fact that he couldn't get out again. Time after time he tried to dig hand and footholds into the splintery ice wall, but he was freezing his fingers and making no headway. He was stoutly but not heavily clothed. The cold began to bite into him. He settled himself on his heels quietly and tried to decide what to do. After an hour, Chuck Evers began to call. John Drinkard knew that if he answered, Chuck would probably attempt the ice himself. Evers' voice came now in measured, regular yips, and while John wavered from the crags above the glacier, he was answered. Now, let me read that again. And while John wavered from the crags above the glacier, he was answered. It was a strange voice, yet not yet oddly not unfamiliar. To John Drinkard it was muffled, but it had a reassuring sound. Drinkard waited in silence. Not many minutes later, a dark silhouette showed in the narrow crack of the sky above. From the voice's first call, Drinkard had realized that they had been watched, probably all day. "Are you injured?" asked the man's odd voice. "I'm okay," Drinkard said. "Just drop me a rope, and I can walk up the wall." "Oh, thank you for the hydrate." Kintron, where did I put my... Oh my goodness, oh there it is. I do need some water. Thank you. "I'm okay," Drinkard said. "Just drop me a rope and I can walk up the wall. Mind the snow ledge." I didn't. And look at me. The man chuckled. A, a joke," he said almost tentatively. "Here is a rope." John Drinkard caught the loop lowered to him. Its texture was strange to his mountaineer's hands. It was down soft, warm to the touch, and he felt its strength instinctively. He climbed it easily, hand over hand. The stranger stood 3 strides back from the creviced lip, negligently holding the rope with one heavy gauntleted hand. Yet he was slender, slight of build, and when Drinkard rose to his feet, he towered over his rescuer. Big John thrusted out his hand. "Well, thanks. Lucky for me, somebody has sense enough to walk around ice cracks." The man seemed to hesitate, then extended his own gloved hand. You must not mind the glove," he said. "It is for your protection. The hand has not yet cooled." not yet cool. That's unusual. John Drinkard was glad of the dimness of the moonlight, for his jaw dropped. But the man turned promptly away. "Come," he said. "I have made an easy way. The one with the swollen foot is concerned for you." John Drinkard, who had climbed scores of peaks up and down the Rockies, followed and felt like a tenderfoot. The man's odd voice and stilted phrases tantalized him. Yet he knew they were not entirely strange. And the matter of the hot hand. Drinkard dropped back a couple of paces. The man was settling his booted feet into a line of holes that had not been on the glacier earlier. Drinkard would have sworn to that. They made the traverse of the ice field a simple matter. As they approached the glacier's edge, Drinkard realized that he could see his companion with an amazing clarity. He seemed limned with a dim red glow, which grew brighter with each step. In a few moments he became as a man outlined in flame, and Drinkard could feel a warmth radiating from him. Yet the snow did not melt under his tread. "It is the boots," said his guide, just as though Drinkard had spoken his thoughts aloud. "They insulate." John Drinkard held on to his poise with something of an effort. "Thank you," he managed dryly. "Not only do you light up, but you pick brains. They're both good tricks." The man ahead chuckled tentatively. "A joke," he said, but it was almost a question. He really doesn't know, thought John Drinkard in astonishment. "That is true," admitted his guide. "Everything else I understand with ease. Even the manly kinds of speech are not difficult. But only on Earth are there jokes. We can never be sure about them." Wait, huh? I thought a gag like this would take cooperation. How many of you boys are in on it?" They had left the ice and were treading along the little ledge that gave onto the boulder field. "We are four," said the man. He seemed to sense no sarcasm in the question. Drinkard noted almost without surprise that the ruddy glow had faded completely, and that the man was simply a dark silhouette ahead. "Ooh," he mentioned, "just on Earth. Oh my goodness, what does this mean?" They reached the tundra, and Chuck Evers' voice hailed them from close by. He sat near the tiny fire, the taped foot and ankle eased on a pack sack before him. "Well," said Evers, "you took your time. Kintron aliens have no sense of humor? Apparently they don't. Apparently jokes are only on Earth." "I fell in a crevasse," John Drinkard said, "and I owe you $5. You should have put the most. You should have put the more important statement first. We can take that up later. I see we have company." "I'm sorry." His rescue from the crevasse and the little trek back across the glacier had been like something from a dream to John Drinkard. But now, with the familiar figure of Chuck across the fire, things suddenly assumed their proper proportions again. He faced his guide, who stood silently by. "This is Chuck Evers. I'm afraid I didn't catch your name." The man's thin face showed palely from the peaked hood that covered his head, and disappeared into the bulky collar of his stout, steel, smooth jacket. Cool Skeleton. Gleep, glorp, gloop, glip, gloop. Humor expression. Oh my goodness. Oh, such a joke. Oh, that is a very funny one. Cool Skeleton. I am called Drez. I am called. I have to pronounce this right. I am called Zell, he said quietly. The two men stared at him, and he returned their looks with composure. It's different anyway, said Chuck finally. Yes, agreed the man. That is because I am different. He can read your head like a crystal ball and light up like a neon sign. John Drinkard heard himself babbling. Evers, though he sensed the strangeness of the situation, turned to Drinkard with concern. Easy there, he said soothingly. You've slipped on the ice before. Sit down and let's quit being funny. The stranger smiled, but his curving lips seemed more a studied imitation than any indication of mirth. Let us all sit, and I will tell you why I am Zell. I will do it because I know, when you repeat my words, that you will not be believed. Evers started to speak, thought better of it, and closed his mouth with an exaggerated snap of teeth. John Drinkard sat wearily on the soft tundra vegetation. You came up to climb the peak, said the man Zell, but also you came to see what caused the lights. If you had not had misfortune, you would have climbed the peak, but there would have been no lights. He glanced away up and across the rocky ride, and to the upper reaches of the glacier. A dull red glow moved down the route he and John Drinkard had recently taken. Keen eyes could readily see that it had the shape of a man. That is Zor, said Zell. We grew in the same membrane. He is erasing our trail across the ice, John Drinkard. Drinkard watched the glow until it slowly faded. Very smart. We can tell tales, but there won't be any proof, eh? That is correct, said the strange man. He turned to Chuck Evers. You wonder about the statements that we grew in the same membrane. I should have said that we are twins. Cool Skeleton, shape of a man. I'll shape a man out of you. I won't sing the song, but now I've got that stuck in my head. Evers caught his breath. Telepathy, he breathed. John wasn't out of his mind. The chill night wind rippled across the alpine field. The little fire flickered and glowed. Overhead the stars were blue and red and yellow ice. The truth is simple, said the man called Zell. We have told it before, but no one believed, and it has not seemed wise to support our facts. We, Zor and I, with our companions Zin and Zet, are explorers. John Drinkard slapped his hand against the boulder beside him, and seemed reassured by its solidity. He shook his head to clear it. I don't get it, he objected. Chuck and I could call ourselves explorers too, if rambling around the mountains every chance we get falls under that heading. We do not explore the mountains, said Zell. Here we rest and allow ourselves to behave normally. We explore in the towns and in the cities, where people gather. It is strenuous, he added, with a sound almost like a sigh. We cannot tolerate it for long. Then we must go into seclusion and renew ourselves. Keen interest was replacing puzzlement in both Evers and Drinkard. They smiled now, and Chuck said, I know what you mean. 10 days in Denver, a fine town, mind you, and I feel like I've been staked with a short rope. You do not exactly know what I mean, said Zell. Your problems are simply matters of preference. Ours are physiological. We cannot long maintain metabolic balance in the company of people. Thus, Zin and Zet are now in the world you inhabit. When they must rest, then our turn comes. Kintron, guess that means I'm an alien, as I too find it tedious to deal with humans before I retreat to recover. Oh my goodness. Oh yes. Are you so you're an alien wolf? But yes, I can relate. I mean, being around people can be a very, very, very exhausting measure to do. I mean, even I, an omniversal interdimensional librarian, get thoroughly drained when I'm in the rare moments of social gatherings. Zell had gathered a pile of small flat stones, and he sat sorting them into his gauntleted fingers. They were simple flakes of weathering gneiss, fire and pressure derived from some granite as ancient as the range. Neither man noticed the idle movements until Zell raised a piece to his mouth and bit into it with a grinding sound, like a man cracking nuts. His teeth were large and square, and they had a metallic gleam. They made short work of the gneiss. Zell flexed his fingers, selected another piece of the rock. Cool skeleton. Humans are very tedious. They get freaked out or want to poke their fingers through my eye sockets. Oh, I suppose. Also, hello there, Aseo. Welcome, and thank you for the lurk. I hope you're enjoying these stories. Among people, he observed, this would be conspicuous. You are not adapted to get oxygen from quartz. We are. You make Houdini look like a piker, Big John told him admirably. I admit that's tougher cereal than I'd want to try, but the point of the gag still escapes me. I am aware of that, said the strange man. You cannot comprehend because your mind is shackled. Yet it must be evident that we are not too much alike. He rose to his feet. That is the matter of the body glow. I can control my body temperature, raising and lowering it as I choose. The greatest difficulty when I am among people is to keep it down to human body heat. Normally it is very much higher than yours, and when, due to exercise and metabolic speed up, excess energy is accumulated, it is satisfying to us to radiate it. You get the same release by deep sighs, by long breaths, by stretching your limbs. Unfortunately, when we radiate rapidly in air, we glow. It has made us conspicuous. We all have our hobbies, said Evers, shifting his swollen ankle and wincing. Did you ever hear of the Liars Club? If you'd like to hold office, you could be president. Zell did not appear offended. I said you would not believe. When it is again my turn to explore, I will search for your Liars Club. I can see from your thoughts that it is concerned with jokes. And this is the one thing about you that we have not mastered. Other explorers have also felt baffled. The function of odd misstatement escapes me. Other explorers? Ever's voice lost its note of ridicule, and Drinkard leaned forward with new interest. You mean there are a lot of incandescent guys like you prowling about? Zell shrugged. All are not from my environment. Many are so unlike you that they cannot mingle, and so must observe from hiding. Others cannot exist in your atmosphere without artificial help. We contact them constantly. Your unawareness is a marvel to us all. For creatures so well supplied with adaptations for sensation, you are indeed blind. Chuck Evers drew a long breath. If I could radiate, I'd be lit up like a theater marquee. You sound like an old professor I had once. I didn't understand him either. Had Zell comprehended humor, he would have smiled, but he simply turned away with finality. Zor is waiting by the glacier, he said. We have plans for this time. When you return to the settlements below, it would perhaps be wisest not to attempt to explain the lights. The next instant, he was gone, without a sound. Kintron, best line for this one. Yes, it is a good line. The two young men sat silently by the dying fire. A few minutes later, both looked up, as though by signal, toward the upper reaches of the glacier. Two glowing spots, dull cherry red, moved steadily across the ice. They were visible for brief minutes, then slowly faded. Chuck Evers shifted restlessly. He shook his head as though a bee were buzzing inside it. Did you hear something? He asked. Not with my ears, said Drinkard, but as plain as a voice. Zell just said to my brain, good luck, boys, in good American. Now I know I'm nuts, grunted Chuck Evers. That's what he said to me. To descend precipice, yeah, can't talk. To descend Precipice Peak, even if only from Bighorn Glacier, is no fit task for a cripple. Still, Evers and Drinkard knew it had to be done. So in the early morning they set about it without haste, and without complaint. Where the going allowed it, Big John simply backpacked Evers. They made use of every ledge, for Chuck could rappel himself down spots he could not climb or be carried. Both were mountain men and tough, but by mid-afternoon they knew that they had had enough. So nothing had ever looked better than the cheerful figure of Hein Klob, slouched in the saddle of his dainty-footed pinto mare, and leading two pack horses loaded with fish panners. The ranger was headed down. The complete Samaritan, that's me, said Hein. I haul fish up and pour fish down. 2 loads for the price of 1. We will accept your insults along with the ride, Chuck Evers said wearily. I never knew what a pretty thing a horse could be. Hein dropped his fish cans, helped to hoist Evers on to one of the pack horses. Drinkard climbed aboard the other. What happened? Asked the ranger. I saw by the headquarters record that you were going up. Evers shrugged, and John Drinkard said, the boy here was playing rock chuck on the stretch below the glacier, and one rolled with him. Evers grinned wryly, and John added, it could happen to anybody, but it's the kind of thing that's partial to tenderfeet. Next time, said Evers humbly, just leave me up there. I ain't worth saving. They stopped only once, at the big switchback. John Drinkard swung from his horse, pried up a stone, and tossed the tobacco can to Evers without a word. The ranger only raised his eyebrows. Back at their tent camp on the lake shore, Evers and Drinkard were not disturbed by questions. When men fail on the peaks, they tell their own stories in their own time. Chuck's ankle showed quick improvement, and in a couple of days he was hobbling about. Only young Rollston came to visit. You have not been back to the lodge, he said. Perhaps you are afraid to show your face? People talk your arms off up there," said Drinkard. He grinned at the pale young man. "Not many of 'em have the gall to come snooping down here." Royston sat composedly on a boulder. "You cannot offend me. I was concerned for you. I was interested, so I came. Did you see the lights?" "Nary a light," said Chuck cheerfully. He sat in a canvas chair with his foot propped up. "I told you they wouldn't show when anybody was up there." Drinkard turned on him. "You collected $5 from me by being on the other side of the fence. You were the man who was sure there would be some signs." Ralston looked at them with pale eyes. "You are both muddling the waters, and you are both lying. There were lights on the peak when you were there, and I have a feeling you saw them. They were quite a show from here." "Then this is the place to see them from," said Chuck. "Closer up you lose perspective." Ralston rose from his seat on the rock. "Friendship means nothing to you, so I will take my small hike back to the lodge again. Actually, I came to say that tomorrow I leave this miserable place and go home. I've endured all the health I can stand." "Now that," said Chuck, "is a different story. We're sorry to see you go, fella." "Our regards to the swamps," John Drinkard put in. 10 to 1 when you get there, you'll wish you were back." Kintron, good cover, can't see the lights from within the lights. That is true. Carl Ralston showed his big teeth in a mirthless smile. This, he said, I very much doubt." They watched him go around the turn in the trail. Then Drinkard took 2 strides to the rock where Ralston had sat. He touched a finger tentatively to the stone and snatched it away. "I thought so," he said. "He really liked us, but this time he was careful not to shake hands. In spite of himself, he has reached his limit of control. His temperature is going up." Evers looked on with puzzled eyes. "He never could see a joke, and he'd wait to pick our brains for a new word," Drinkard pointed out. "Royston is a name out of a hat," said John Drinkard. "When that lad really goes home, he'll go with his buddies up there on the peak. I wonder which he is, Zin or Zet." The end. Uh, that one was a long one. That was an interesting one. They had a bit of a build up there. I will admit though, it's kind of a difficult story too. Alien 20. It was interesting. Yeah, it was interesting, and the hints that they give in there that there are a lot of aliens who are observing Earth and are mingling among humanity is interesting. I just wish they kind of explored that a little bit more. Yeah, it was an interesting read. So, my dear scholars, I will give you a choice. It's past our usual time. So, my dear scholars, but I have one more story sitting right next to me. So I'll give you the choice. Either we can end the stream here tonight for now, or I can read this last story. What say you, my dear scholars? Yulian 20 story right away. What say the rest of you? I have one vote for a story. Excuse me. Any other votes? Well, we've heard a call for the story. So, I think we'll be reading the story. Give me 1 second. I'm going to take a short break, and I will be right back, my dear scholars. All right, I am back, my dear scholars. All right, so we will have one final story for this science fiction evening. And this one is actually from probably the best known author of the stories I have chosen. And that is Theodore Sturgeon. How many of you have heard of Theodore Sturgeon? Anyone? Julian 20, love his works. Oh yes, he published quite a few famous novels. His most famous one is More Than Human, which is an interesting tale of the next step in human development, and it's quite interesting. Kintron sounds familiar. Not sure if I've read ones. Yeah, he is, like I said, he's very famous author. Um, he the story I'm going to read actually was adapted for television a few times. In 20, aren't there some on Star Trek? Yes, he did. He did do some Star Trek episodes. Um, I believe Arena was an adaptation of one of his stories, if I recall. Though that has a funny story in itself, because originally it wasn't going to be an adaptation, only the scriptwriters discovered halfway through that the story they were writing was almost exactly the same as the published short story Fun and Games, which was the name of, not Fun and Games, it was called Arena. The original story called Arena that he had written. So they wrote to Theodore Sturgeon quickly begging permission to adapt the short story and then giving him credit on the episode. So this is the one odd story out of our reading tonight, in that it was not published in the 1950s. This one was originally published in 1947, June 1947. And this story is called The Sky Was Full of Ships by Theodore Sturgeon. Oh dear. Accident. Okay. Sykes died, and after 2 years, they tracked Gordon Kemp down and brought him back, because he was the only man who knew anything about the death. Kemp had to face a coroner's jury in Switchpath, Arizona, a crossroads just at the edge of the desert, and he wasn't too happy about it, being city bred and not quite understanding the difference between hicks and folks. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Had there been great wainscoting had there been great wainscoting walls and a statue of blind justice, it would have been more impersonal and for Kemp easier to take. But this courtroom was Crossroads Granger's Hall in Switchpath, Arizona. The presiding coroner was Bert Wilson, who held a corncob pipe instead of a gavel. At their ease around the room were other men, dirt farmers and prospectors like Wilson. At yeah, it was like a movie short. It needed only a comedy dance number and somebody playing a jug. But there was nothing comic about it. These people were in a position to pile trouble on Kemp, trouble that might very easily wind up in the gas chamber. The coroner leaned forward. "You got nothing to be afeared of, son, if your conscience is clear." "I still ain't talking. I brought the guy in, didn't I? Would I have done that if I killed him?" The coroner stroked his stubble, a soft rasping sound like a rope being pulled over a wooden beam. "We don't know about that, Kemp. Why can't you get it through your head that nobody's accusing you of anything? You're just a feller knows something about the death of this here Alonstro Sykes. This court'll like to know exactly what happened." He hesitated, shuffled. "Sit down, son," said the coroner. That did it. He slumped into the straight chair that one of the men pushed up for him, and told this story. I guess I better go right back to the beginning. The first time I ever saw this here Sykes. I was working in my shop one afternoon when he walked in. He watched what I was doing and spoke up. "You Gordon Kemp?" I said yes, and looked him over. He was a scrawny feller, probably 60 years old and wound up real tight. I should have done it in a 60-year-old voice, oops. He talked fast, smoked fast, moved fast, as if there wasn't time for nothing. But he had to get on to something else. I asked him what he wanted. "You the man had that article in the magazine about the concentrated atomic torch?" he said. "Yeah," I told him. "Only that guy from the magazine, he used an awful lot of loose talk. Says my torch was 300 years ahead of its time. Actually, it was something I stumbled on by accident, more or less. The ordinary atomic hydrogen torch. Plenty hot. I figured out a ring-shaped electromagnet set just in front of the jet to concentrate it. It repelled the hydrogen particles and concentrated them. It'll cut anything. Anything. And since it got patented, you'd be surprised at the calls I got. You got no idea how many people want to cut into bank vaults and the side doors of hock shops. Well, about Sykes. I told him this magazine article went a little too far, but I did have quite a gadget. Darn it. Oops. Sorry about that. I kind of semi-injured myself. Give me 1 second, scholars. I gotta do some. Oh my goodness. Gadget. I gave him a demonstration or two, and he seemed satisfied. Finally, I told him I was wasting my time unless he had a yeah. Finally, I told him I was wasting my time unless he had a proposition. He looking real happy about this torch of mine, and he nods. "Sure. Only you'll have to take a couple of weeks off. Go out west Arizona. Cut away into a cave there." "Cave, huh?" I said. "Is it legal?" I didn't want no trouble. "Sure it's legal," he tells me. "How much?" He says he hates to argue. "If you'll get me into that place, and you can satisfy yourself as to whether it's legal, I'll give you $5,000, he says. Now, 5,000 berries cuts a lot of ice for me, especially for only 2 weeks' work. Besides, I liked the old guy's looks. He was queer as a $9 bill, mind you, and had a funny way of carrying on, but I could see he was worth the kind of money he talked. He came to see me a couple more times, and we sweated out the details. Oh, sorry, I skipped a whole section. Oops. He looked like he really needed help too. Oh, maybe I'm just a Boy Scout at heart. As I say, I liked him, money or no money, and chances are I'd have helped him out for free. He came to see me a couple more times, and we sweated out the details. It wound up with him and me on the train, and my torch and the other gear in the baggage car up front. Maybe some of you remember the day we arrived here. He seemed to know a lot of people here. Hmm? I thought so. He told me how many years he had been coming out to Swish Patch. He told me lots of things. He was one of the talkiest old geezers I ever did see. I understood about 1/9 of what he said. He was lonely, I guess. I was the first man he ever called in to help him with his work, and he spilled the overflow of years of working by himself. About this switch path proposition. He told me that when he was just a punk out of college, he was an archaeologist roaming around the desert looking for old stuff, vases and arrowheads and such stuff. And he run across this here room in the rock at the bottom of a deep cleft. He got all excited when he told me about this part of it. Went on a mile a minute about Pleistocene ages and Mesozoics and paleolithographs or something. I called him down to earth, and he explained to me that this room was down in rock that was very old, a couple of 100,000 years, or maybe a half a million. Excuse me. He said that rock had been there either before mankind had a start here on Earth, or maybe about the same time as the missing link. Me, I don't care about dead people or dead people's great grandfathers, but Sachs was all enthusiastic. Anyhow, it seemed that this cave had been opened by some sort of an earthquake or something, and the stuff in it must have been there all that time. What got him excited was that the stuff was machinery of some kind, and must have been put there way before there was any human beings on Earth at all. Cool Skeleton, I am back. Welcome back, Cool Skeleton. We're on our last story for the night. This seems silly to me. I wanted to know what kind of machinery. Well, he says, I thought at first that it was some sort of a radio transmitter. Get this, he says. Here is a machine with an antenna on top of it, just like a microwave job. And beside it is another machine. This second machine is shaped like a dumbbell standing on one end. The top of it is a sort of covered hopper, and at the waist of the machine is an arrangement of solenoids made out of some alloy that has never been seen before on this earth. There's gearing between this machine and the other, the transmitter. I have figured out what this dumbbell thing is. It's a recorder. I want to know what it is recording. He lays one finger on the side of his nose and winks at me. Thought, he says. Raw thought. But that isn't all. Earthquakes, continental shifts, weather cycles, lots more stuff. It integrates all these things with thought. I want to know how he knows all this. That was when he told me that he had been with this thing for the better part of the last 30 years. He'd figured it all out all by himself. He was real touchy about that part of it. Then I began to realize what was the matter with the poor old guy. He really figured he had something big here, and he wanted to find out about it. But it seems he was an ugly kid and a shy man, and he wanted to make the big splash all by himself. It wouldn't do for him just to be known as the man who discovered this thing. Any dolt could have stumbled across it, he'd say. He wanted to find out everything there was about this thing before he let a soul know about it. Greater than the Rosetta Stone, he used to say. Greater than the nuclear hypothesis. Oh, he was a great one for slinging the $5 words. And it will be Sykes who gave this to the world, he would say. Sykes will give it to the humanity, complete and proverbial, and history will reckon from the day I speak. Oh, he was wacky, all right. I didn't mind, though. He was harmless, and a nicer little character you never want to meet. Funny thing, that funny guy, that Sykes. What kind of life he led, I can only imagine. He had dough, inherited an income or something, so he didn't have the problems that bother most of the rest of us. He would spend days in that cavern staring at the machines. He didn't want to touch them. He only wanted to find out what they were doing there. One of them was running. The big machine, the dumbbell-shaped one, was running. It didn't make no noise. Both machines had a little disc set into the side. It was half red, half black. On the big machine, the one he called the recorder, this here disc was turning. Not fast, but you could see it was moving. Sykes was all excited about that. On the way out here on the train, he spouted a lot of stuff. I don't know why. Maybe he thought I was too dumb to ever tell anybody about it. If that's what he thought, he had the right idea. I'm just a mechanic who happened to have a bright idea. Anyway, he showed me something he had taken from the cave. It was a piece of wire, about 6 feet long, but wire like I have never seen before or since. It was about 35 gauge, like a hair, and crooked. Crimped, I mean. Sykes said it was magnetized too. It bent easy enough, but it wouldn't kink at all, and you couldn't put a tight bend in it. I imagined it dent a pair of pliers. He asked me if I thought I could break it. I tried, and got a gash in my lunch hook for my trouble. So help me, it wouldn't break, and it wouldn't cut, and you couldn't get any of those crimps out of it. I don't mean you'd pull the wire and it would snap back. No, you couldn't pull it straight at all. Sykes told me on the train that it had taken him 8 months to cut that piece loose. It was more than just tough. It fused with itself. The first 4 times he managed to cut it through, he couldn't get the ends apart fast enough to keep them from fusing together again. He finally had to clamp a pair of steel blocks around the wire, wait for enough wire to feed through to give him some slack, and then put about 12 tons of some shears to cut through the wire. Forged iridium steel, those cutters were, and that wire left a heck of a hole in 'em. But the wire parted. He had a big helical spring hauling the wire tight, so that the instant it parted, it was snapped out of the way. It had to be cut twice to get the one piece out, and when he put the ends together, they fused. I mean both on the piece he took out and the 2 free ends of the machine. Not a mark, not a bulge. Excuse me. Well, you all remember when we arrived here with all that equipment, and how we hired a car and went off into the desert? All the while, the old man was happy as a kid. "Kemp, my boy," he said, "I've got it decoded. I can read that tape. Do you realize what that means? Every bit of human history. I can get it in detail. Every single thing that ever happened to this earth or the people in it. You have no idea in what detail that tape records," he says. "Want to know who put the B on Alexander the Great? Want to know what the name of Pericles' girlfriend really was? I have it all here. What about these Indian and old Greek legends about a lost continent? What about old forts' fireballs? Who was the man in the iron mask? I have it, son. Have it here." That was what we. That's yeah. That was what went on all the way out there, to that place in the dry gulch where the cave was. Excuse me. Let me get a drink. Oh my goodness. I hope you're all enjoying these stories, my dear scholars. They're quite interesting. Excuse me. That was what that was what went on all the way out there to that place in the dry gulch where the cave was. You wouldn't believe a place that was to get to. How that old guy ever had the energy to keep going back to it, I'll never know. We had to stop the car about 20 miles from here and hoof it. The country out there is all tore up. If it hadn't already seen the color of his if I hadn't already seen the color of his money, I'd have said the heck with it. Sands and heat and big rocks and more places to fall into and break your silly neck, Lord. Me with a pack on my back too. The torch, the gas, and the power supply and all. We got to this cliff, see? And he outs with a length of rope and makes it fast to a stone column that's eroded nearby. He had a slip snaffle on it. He lowers himself into the gulch and I drop the gear down after him. And then down I go. Cool skeleton, weird wire story, good. Good! Good, glad to hear it. Brother, it's dark in there. We go uphill about 150 yards, and then Sykes pulls up in front of a facing. By the light of his flash, I can see the remains of a flock of campfires he'd made there over the years. Excuse me. There it is, he says. It's all yours, Kemp. If that 300 years in the future torch of yours is any good, prove it. I unlimber my stuff and got to work. And believe me, it was hard, slow going. But I got through. Took 9 hours before I had a hole fit for us to crawl through, and another hour for it to cool enough so we could use it. All that time the old man talked. It was mostly bragging about the job he'd done decoding the wire he had. It was mostly Greek to me. I have a record here, he says, switching his husk of fire. There, he says, swishing his husk of wire around. Of a phase of the Industrial Revolution in Central Europe that will have the historians gnashing their teeth. But have I said anything? Not me, not Sykes. I'll have the history of mankind written in such detail, with such authority, that the name of Sykes will go into the language as a synonym for the miraculously accurate. I remember that because he said it so much. He said it like it tasted good. I remember once I asked him why it was we had to bother cutting in. Where was the hole he had used? That, my boy, he says, is an unforeseen quality of the machines. For some reason they closed themselves up. In a way, I'm glad they did. I was unable to get back in, and I was forced to concentrate on my sample. If it hadn't been for that, I doubt I would have ever had. I doubt that I would ever have cracked the code. So I asked him what about all this? What were the machines and who left them there and what for? All this while I was cutting away at that rock facing. And man, I never seen rock like that, if it was rock, which now I doubt. It comes off in flakes in front of my torch. My torch that'll cut anything. Do you know that in those 9 hours I only got through about 7.5 inches of that stuff? My torch will walk into laminated bank vaults like the door was open. When I asked him, he shut up for a long time, but I guess he wanted to talk. He sure was enthusiastic. Besides, he figured I was too dumb to savvy what he was talking about. As I said before, he was right there. So he run off about it, and this is about how it went. Who left these machines here or how they operate, we may never know. It would be interesting to find out, but the important thing is to get the records and decode them all. It had taken him a while to recognize that machine as a recorder. The tip-off was that it was running, and the other one, the transmitter, was not. Excuse me. He thought at first that maybe the transmitter was busted. But after a year or two of examining the machines without touching them, he began to realize that there was a gear train waiting by the tape where it fed through the gizmo that clamped it. This gear train was fixed to start the transmitter, see? But it was keyed to a certain crimp in the tape. In other words, when something happened somewhere on Earth that was just the right thing, the crimper would record it, and the transmitter would get keyed off. Sachs studied that setup for years before he figured the particular squiggle in that wire that would start that transmitter descending. Where was it sending it to? Why? Sure, he thought about that, but that didn't matter to him. What was supposed to happen when the tape ran out? Who or what would come and look at it when it was all done? You know, he didn't care. He just wanted to read that tape, is all. Seems there's a lot of guys write history books and stuff, and he wanted to call them liars. He wanted to tell them the way it really was. Can you imagine? So there I am, cutting away with my super torch on what seems to be a solid wall made out of some stuff that has no right to be so tough. I could still see it. So dark, and me with black goggles on. And the doc with his back to me so's he won't wreck his eyes, spouting along about history and the first unbiased account of it, and how he was gonna thrust it on the world and just kill all those guys with all those theories. Excuse me. I remember quitting once for a breather and letting the mercury cells juice up a bit while I had a smoke. He's smoking while there's mercury cells in the device? I'm not sure that's very smart, but then again, he did say that he wasn't very smart. Just to make talk, I asked Sachs when does he think that transmitter is going to go to work. Oh, he says. Oh, he says. It already did. It's finished. And that's how I knew that my figurine was right. That tape has a certain rate through the machine. It's in millimeters per month. I have the figure. It wouldn't matter to you, but something happened a while ago that made it possible to check. July 16th, 1945 to be exact. Julian 20. Not a lot of smart happened back then. That is true, that is true. You don't tell me, I says. Oh, he says real pleased. He says real pleased. But I do. That day something happened which put a wiggle in the wire. There. The thing I was looking for all along. It was the crimp that triggered the transmitter. I happened to be in the cave at the time. The transmitter started up, and the little disc spun around like mad. Then it stopped. I looked in the papers the next week to see what it was. And nothing I could find. It wasn't until the following August that I found out. I suddenly caught wise. Oh, the atom bomb. You mean that rig was set up to send something as soon as an atomic explosion kicked off somewhere on Earth? Let me get another drink. He nodded his head. By the glare of the red-hot rock, he looked like a skinny old owl. That's right. That's why we've got to get in there in a hurry. It was after the second bikini blast that the cave got sealed up. I don't know if that transmission is ever going to get picked up. I don't know if anything is going to happen if it is picked up. I do know that I have the wire decoded, and I mean to get those records before anybody else does. If that wall had been any thicker, I never would have gotten through. When I got my circle cut, and the cutout piece dropped inside, my rig was about at its last gasp. So was Sykes. For the last 2 hours he'd been hopping up and down with impatience. 30 years' work, he kept saying. I've waited for this for 30 years and I won't be stopped now. Hurry up! Hurry up! And when we had to wait for the opening to cool, I thought he'd go wild. I guess that's what built him up for his big breakdown. He sure was keyed up. Well, at last we crawled into the place. He talked so much about it that I almost felt I was coming back to something instead of seeing it for the first time. You see? There were the machines, the big ones, about 7 feet tall. The big one about 7 feet tall, dumbbell shaped, and the little one sort of a rounded cube with a bunch of macaroni on top. That was this antenna he was talking about. We lit a pressure lantern that flooded the place with light. It was small, with a floor about 9 by 9, and he jumped over to the machines. He scrabbles around and hauls out some wire. Then he stops and stands there looking stupid at me. What's the matter, Doc? I say. I called him Doc. He gulps and swallows. The reel's empty. It's empty. There's only 8 inches of wire here. Only. And that was when he fainted. I jumped up right away and shook him and shoved him around a little until his eyes started to blink. He sits up and shakes himself. Refilled, he says. He is a real horse. Kemp, they've been here. I began to get the idea. The lower chamber is empty. The upper one is full. The whole setup is arranged to run off a new recording. Where is Sykes' 30 years' work? He starts to laugh. I look at him. I can't take that. The place is too small for all that noise. I never heard anybody laugh like that. Like short screams, one after the other, fast. He laughs and he laughs. I carry him out. I put him down outside and go back in for my gear. I can hear him laughing out there, and that busted up voice of his echoing in the gulch. I get everything onto the backpack and go to put out the pressure lantern when I hear a little click. It's that transmitter. The little red and black disc is turned around on it. I just stand there watching it. It only runs for 3 or 4 minutes. And then it begins to get hot in there. I got scared. I ducked out of the hole and picked up Sykes. He didn't weigh much. I looked back in the hole. The cave was lit up, red. The machines were cherry red, straw color, white, just that quick. They melted. I saw it. I ran. I don't hardly remember getting to the rope and tying Sykes on and climbing up and hauling him up after me. He was quiet then, but conscious. I carried him away until the light from the gulch stopped me. I turned around to watch. I could see a ways down in the gulch. It was filling up with lava. It was lighting up the whole desert. And I never felt such heat. I ran again. I got to the car and dumped Sykes in. He shifted around on the seat some. I asked him how he felt. He didn't answer that, but mumbled a lot of stuff. Something like this. They knew when we'd reach the atomic age. They wanted to be told when. The transmitter did just that. They came and took the recordings and refilled the machine. They sealed off the room with something they thought only controlled atomic power could break into. This time the transmitter was triggered to human beings in that room. Your torch did it, Kemp. That 300 years in the future torch. They think we have atomic power. They'll come back. Who, Doc? Who? I says. I don't know, he mumbles. Then there'd be only one reason why someone, some creature, would want to know a thing like that. And that's so they could stop us. So I laughed at him. I got in and started the car and laughed at him. Doc, I said, we ain't gonna be stopped now. Like the papers say, we're in the atomic age if it kills us. But we're in for keeps. Why, humanity would have been killed off before I'd get out of this atomic age. I know that, Kemp. I know. That's what I mean. What have I done? What have we done? After that, he quiet a while. And when I look at him again, I see he's dead. So I brought him in. In the excitement, I faded. It just didn't look good to me. I knew nobody would listen to a yarn like that. Let her drink of water. Excuse me. Sorry. There was silence in the courtroom until somebody coughed, and then everyone felt he had to make a sound with his throat or his feet. The coroner held up his hand. I can see what Brother Kemp was worried about. If that story is true, I, for one, would think twice about telling it. He's a liar! Roared a prospector from the benches. He's a murdering liar! I have a kid reads that kind of stuff, and I never did like to see him at it. Believe me, he's a going to cut it out as of right now. I think this Kemp feller needs a handing. Now, Jed, bellowed the coroner, if we kill off this man, we do it legal. Here? The sudden hubbub quieted, and the coroner turned to the prisoner. Listen here, Kemp. Something just occurred to me. How long was it from the time of the first atom blast until the time that room got sealed up? I don't know. About 2 years. Little over. Why? And how long since that night you'd been talking about when Sykes died? Or was murdered? Growled the prospector. Shut up, Jed. Well, Kemp? About 18 months. No. Near 2 years. Well, then, said the coroner, spraying his hands. If there are anything in your story, or in that goofy idea of the dead man's about something coming to kill us off, well, ain't it about time they did? There were guffaws, and the end of the Grange Hall disappeared in a burst of flame. Yelling, cursing, some screaming, they pushed and fought their way out into the moonlit road. The sky was full of ships. The end. Oh boy. That is quite the tale. I have to hand it to Sturgeon. Yes. Julian 20. Oh wow. Yes. Oh wow indeed. And if you are interested, there is a actual television adaptation of that story, which is in the public domain. They changed the title of it to Verdict from Space, but it is available to view. Cool Skeleton. Seems like someone didn't want their equipment found. Something like that. It seems what happened was that they assumed that humanity had higher technology than we actually did because of the blowtorch. It tricked them into thinking that it unwittingly tricks them into thinking that we were a threat to them. So they came over to eliminate that threat. Still, quite the story. Let's close the curtain on tonight's reading stream, and let's head over to the chat area where we will talk. Alright then. So, my dear scholars, did you enjoy our little venture into the genre of science fiction? Do any of you have a favorite story from? Oh my goodness, my voice. Excuse me. You and Tony really enjoyed this evening. Um, cool skeleton. Ooh wee ooh. Yes, yes indeed. Did any of you have a favorite story from tonight's reading? Alien 20. The first one was my favorite. $1,000 a plate. Oh, good. That was a fun one, to say the least. Alien 20 first. Yeah, I think all the story. Well, the Light on Precipice Peak has its weaknesses, so I was okay with that one. But the rest of them I think were very very good. They were all very good. Otherwise, Alien 20 they were all so different. I tried to choose ones that were all different kinds because science fiction isn't always just robots and aliens. Although this did have aliens, a lot of them, but it's all sorts of tales. It's a very wide genre. Cool Skeleton, I liked them all. Good, I'm glad to hear it. So, talking about next week. Next week, we will be, 20, great job reading. Oh, thank you. Next week, next Tuesday, I will be trying to finish Tome. I think we're very close to the end. Hopefully, we will not run into any problems like we did last time, and it will be an enjoyable stream. And Thursday, we'll be starting a new novel reading. We'll be reading Treasure Island. So get yourselves ready for some good old fashioned pirate literature. Cool Skeleton Smiley Rock. Oh, of course you had to remind me of Stony. Great. Thank you, Cool Skeleton. Arg, indeed, Julian 20. So for now, let's see who is streaming so we might raid. Alright. Let's visit Sophia Ignacy, which I believe she is doing a reading stream. So, my dear scholars, I say unto you, good evening, good afternoon. What did I say? Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Oh my goodness, my mind. Till we meet each other again in the study. Take care, and I shall see you next time. Farewell and bye bye.